المداخلة الثالثة ستكون في موضوع المواطنة، في موضوع مداخلة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، موضوع إيكولوجيا البحث التربوي نحو التعددية والانفتاح. أظن أن هذه الترجمة صحيحة. باسمكم أرحب بالأستاذ مصطفى كمال الذي أتانا من اسكتلندا وأستاذ في جامعة أدنبرا، تخصص وفي الحقيقة هو مغربي طبعا، خريج جامعة القاضي عياض بمراكش، مختص في internationalization of education، سأترجمها بعولمة التربية. مفهوم مصطلح عولمة التربية. كذلك الجانب الآخر من اهتمامات الأستاذ مصطفى هي منظومة القيم ومساءلتها على ضوء أو في ضوء العولمة. على مستوى البحث كذلك يهتم بما يسمى بالمواطنة العامة أو المواطنة العامة global citizenship education. التربية على المواطنة العامة، أو في القديم كنا نسميها المواطنة الدولية أو المواطنة الكونية. على كل هو عضو في مجموعة من ربما نسميها منظمات مهتمة بهذه القضايا خاصة. Okay, Mustafa, I'll switch to English. So you are welcome. And the topic will be ecology of education research towards plurality and openness. You are welcome in your country, you are welcome in our university, and we would like to give you a special thanks for venturing and for taking the opportunity to come all the way from Scotland to Rabat. The floor is yours, obviously within a time scope of 20 minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. That was very kind of you for that wonderful introduction. As such, it's very kind of you. It's a great pleasure to be here and to share with you this important milestone, 14th youth anniversary with faculty. I'm really particularly pleased, and I want to thank the Dean, Professor Campus, for the kind invitation, and thank you very much. So I'll start with a little bit of Arabic just by way of introduction, and then move on to English. So زملائي الأساتذة، أعزائي الطلبة، الموضوع ديال الكلمة هي الإيكولوجي ديال الريشيرش ديال الإديوكاسيون. So I want to talk a little bit about education and research, but I find myself pausing and thinking about what do we mean by education? What is education? And really a question that really consumed me and made me think about this sort of like notion of what it means to be involved in education. What is the purpose of education? There is a wider background in here, and I think Professor Chiari did a wonderful job there in terms of providing a context, a wider context. And wider context here is the rise of a particular way of doing research. And this particular way of doing research is based on a medical model. So, for instance, if you want to invent a vaccine, you take two groups of people, one of whom you give them a placebo, just, not real medicine, and the other one you give them medicine. And you judge the effectiveness of that particular medicine by comparing the two groups. And that's really the context here in terms of research for education. It's what we call research-based or evidence-based education. And I want to push back against that because I think the danger of that is we lose track of the purpose of education. And much of what we're going to be talking about today is really to introduce you to a philosopher of education called Gerd Biesta. He's an interesting character because he's German and works in a British sort of like context. And the British context, same with the American context, there's a dominance to this notion of the science of education as such, this idea of that education should be a scientific discipline in the sense of the medical model. So that's really the idea that I want to push back. And what I would like to do is shift the register of defining what we mean by good academic research by orienting it towards an ethical dimension. In other words, good research becomes an ethical question. Concomitantly, I argue that one of the implications of the shift towards evidence-based research in education is importing lessons from other research and educational contexts. You take a British context or an American context, for instance, and say, well, that works in America, that works in the UK, let's impose it and try if it works in Morocco. It's not going to work, and that's really the key idea here. Because I think the problem with that is it looks at education and educational research in a very narrow, technicist and instrumentalist way, and a really key word for me here. Further, it discredits cultural knowledge in education research and silences other modes of research. Finally, I suggest an ecology of education research based on the principle of openness, plurality. To advance this argument, this paper is divided into three parts. The first part, I deal with the question of what counts as educational good research. The second part deals with the question of what is good education. Something that we take for granted, but what do we mean by good education? It's got a lot of names. Often people talk about it in terms of excellence in education and so on and so forth, but really just want to dwell on this idea of education. What is the purpose of education? And finally, the third part, we'll return to the question of education research and outline briefly an ecology of research. So the first question, well, I'm going to frame this around three questions. The first question is, what counts as educational good research? Now, I frame my discussion around the purpose of education research because what we have is a dominant view. It tells us that education should solve problems. It sounds great. That education should solve problems. That is the purpose of education, and that's a dominant narrative. So the role of education is to generate knowledge that will lead to the improvement in the education system. This rationale provides a powerful case for developing research and knowledge that deals with what is referred to as what works. It's a huge sort of movement in the UK and America. And it's putting a lot of stress on teachers in the sense that it gives them a model, say, look, this intervention works as such, this is what you have to do as such. I'll try to question that one. What we call evidence-based practice or evidence-informed practice. Now, these sort of issues or the appeal to these notions is widely documented in the literature. I've got a number of references in here, I'll skip those. But the idea here is there are lots of programs that develop to improve the quality of evidence for teaching. For example, the Teaching and Learning Research Program in the UK, a lot of discussion in Canada, and a lot of shifts in American education policy in this idea of what works. And what's animating this centrality given to this notion of that education should solve problems is really an anxiety about global ranking. No country wants to come last in the league table in terms of education. So we have this dominance, and perhaps represented by the OECD program for International Student Assessment, what we call PISA for short. And this program, it takes the ability of 15-year-old children and measures them test them rather in terms of reading, mathematics and sciences. And you rank a number of countries, and God forbid if you, as a country, you come last in that, or you go down the ranking. There's a lot of issues around that. And for policymakers and governments, this program provides a clear basis for setting improvement targets, especially gaining a higher place in the league table. That's what they're all concerned with, just to come top. And of course, there are a number of critiques of these measures, notably the idea that what they focus on is on really narrow set of quantifiable measures, and they operate with a flawed methodology. So it might come first in the ranking, but is that good education as such? What are the people that you're producing in that respect? And to my mind, it really is important to interrogate the assumption about education that underpin this view of research as problem-solving endeavor. In short, research here is framed within a technological logic. In a sense, this highlights what we call the technological expectations of education. Essentially, education is like a factory. You have an input in terms of the teaching method and so on and so forth, and it would lead to a better outcome if you control the output. So you're dealing with, in terms of system thinking, you're dealing with a closed sort of system that you have to control all these sort of operation in order to produce a good product as such. So education here is based on, as I said, on this idea. If you have the right input, for instance, techniques, intervention, this will generate the desired outcome: good scores, declining rates of truancy, good discipline, good level of motivation, and so on and so forth. So research here, and this is really the interesting question in terms of education research. If you're concerned with this idea of improving an education system, the whole idea of research, all it does, it encounters problems. I.e., there are problems in the world there, for instance, declining rate of motivation in terms of our students. So research comes in at a later stage in order to rectify that particular problem. And I think this issue here that research only deals with problems that exist in there, I think it's challenged by a wonderful theorist called Carol Backe. She reminds us that problems do not exist outside the policy process to be solved. Instead, problems are constituted as problems within a particular policy scape. And the question here that she poses is, what's the problem represented to be in a policy? Why are we concerned with a particular problem? Why are we framing it in this particular way? So this particular question, it has the analytical potential of allowing us to rethink or reorient the purpose of educational research. So instead of providing solution to educational problem, educational research ought to identify and problematize the way problems are conceptualized. That's really the key thing for me here, that educational research should not just solve problem, but it should create problems. It should problematize things in that sort of respect. So here, good education research is not a technological endeavor, and by asking the question, interrogating how we frame educational problem, it provokes us and challenges us to think otherwise and to think anew. How can we possibly reconceptualize something? And in so doing, research becomes transformative and pedagogical in a sense. Research becomes educational, because what you're doing there is you're not just educating students as such, but you are educating policymakers. You are educating the wider public about a particular problem, and that's really the purpose of research. And the next question is, what is good education? I just want to start with a couple of comments to just outline a little bit about why we're concerned with this one here if we're talking about research. And so far I've talked about the dominant research view in education, that it is to solve a problem. What is missing here, however, is a discussion of the purpose of education as such. I want to quote a former minister, English former minister, talks about the purpose of education, and I quote, "Education is the engine of our economy. It is the foundation of our culture. although that hours, I don't know who's in and out in that particular question, and it's an essential preparation for adult life. We all have a responsibility to educate the next generation of informed citizens, introducing them to the best that has been thought and said, and instilling in them a love of knowledge, of culture, for their own sake. But education is also about the political, the practical business, ensuring that young people receive the preparation they need to ensure a good and fulfilling career, and have the resilience and moral characters to overcome the challenges and succeed. Now, it is incredibly difficult to argue against this view. Such a dominant sort of view is so ingrained. But the problem here is, what does it say about education? Education remains as an instrument. What is educational about education itself? And that's really the key question that I want us to consider as such. Now, Gerd Biester provides a powerful antidote to this notion of global policy discourse as such, that sees education as a mere instrument. And this is really the key point here, is that, is education just an instrument to achieve something, or is there something educational about education itself as such? And Gerd Biester provided me with a powerful way to think around this one here. And I'm just going to outline some of these ideas for the sake of brevity. But he wrote a wonderful book called Education in an Age of Measurement, Ethics, Politics and Democracy. A wonderful book. It's quite a lead in this respect. And his starting argument is really this notion of education. What happens in education? He defines education as a space in which we encounter different generations. Some of us are old, some of us are young, and education really is that space for us to encounter. Now, this encounter itself is about helping each other to be in the world. So education is therefore an existential question, and both in local and global sense. Now, we live in a particular world, and that particular world, be it local, be it global, fosters or inhibits certain ways of being. So how do we help our young people as such? Okay? What is education for? What is educational about education as such? There are three domains that Biester gives, one of which is subjectification, the other one is socialization, and the third one is qualification. And his basic argument is that at the heart of these three notions is the concept of subjectification. How do you become a subject of your own life, not the subject of a particular intervention? How do we help young people to be? We bring them, we say basically to them, welcome to our world when they're born. Okay? But how do we enable them to become subject as opposed to just the object of a particular educational sort of like intervention? And this subjectification is the idea that the child needs to exist as a subject, not an object of identification. This is, of course, a very challenging and lifelong issue. Some of us with children will appreciate what I'm meaning here. So we need to give them an orientation in the world. And this is the second purpose of education, which is the idea of socialization. So it's the task of education to orient children or young people to welcome him or her into our world and show to them how we have organized our world in terms of our culture, in terms of our values, in terms of our religion, in terms of our histories as such. And that will enable them to become objects in the world. But also, in order for them to be successful, we have to equip them with certain skills and knowledges, and that's the idea of qualification as such, because we need to equip them with knowledge and skill to respond to the urgency of the present. What are the problems that are facing us in terms of not just sort of ecological degradation as such, but issues of poverty, issues that we've spoken about this morning. So thank you for that one. I'll just skip a few things. So the key thing here is we need to enable them to gain certain sort of qualification, and this is the third purpose of education. So taken together, these three purposes, BS argues, constitute good education. And these are some of the issues that we need to respond to. Basically, what is education supposed to be for and about? And what is educational about education? I'm just going to, if I can borrow just a couple of minutes, yeah, and then I'll move on to, is that okay? Thank you. I'll just skip some things. In terms of research itself, I'm not suggesting that we return back to what we call the paradigms war that talks about early on, that there are positivists, post-positivists, and so on and so forth. But I think we need to think in terms of, not in terms of research questions, but research problems as such. That's what I often say to my students, because they will come up to me with a wonderful, they say, oh, I've got this brilliant research question, and I'll ask them, what is the problem that grabs you, that you want to research? And I'm guided here by a quote by Jackie Mazzi, who said that instead of beginning with questions which prompts answer and foreclose thought, researchers might begin with these things that present problem in the sense that we take hold and would not let go. As such. That's really what the key idea there. And then finally, I'm going to say something a little bit about the ecology of research, that often when we think of the idea of research as solving problems, we are providing a hierarchy. We're only looking at certain research paradigms and not the others. But I want us to broaden the idea here and adopt an ecology, which means that various traditions coexist in that particular case here. And it will allow us to explore a number of questions, one of which will be questions relating to the extent to which our pedagogies validate our learners' identities. When you come into the classroom, do we validate your identity as such? Do we foster creativity in that way? Do we narrate? Do we give you space to narrate your lived experience? And it is in asking these questions that the importance and challenge for academic institutions like yours surface. Okay? When looking at the themes and the various talks in this program, I was struck by the important questions raised and the contribution this colloquium makes. And in this colloquium, opens up and hold a space. It's really important to open up that space and to hold it, to open and hold a space for a range of conversations about education within a Moroccan context. At the same time, one of the greatest contributions of this colloquium is that it makes the various inquiries from the field of Moroccan education research available to public scrutiny. Thank you very much.